All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening. My name is William Roca. I'm the Director of Programs here at Village Preservation. We're so glad you're going to spend the next hour or so with us here on The Sounds of the Village, a conversation with Richard Barone and Andrew Berman. Before I introduce our wonderful guests this evening, I just want to tell you a little bit about Village Preservation if you are unfamiliar with us. We were founded back in 1980 and we work to document, celebrate, and preserve the special architectural, cultural, and historic heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've helped get landmark designation for more than 1,300 buildings in our neighborhoods. And we also put on about 75 to 80 programs like this throughout the year. The majority of them are free and open to the public, but we are a members-based organization, so your support is critical to help us do the work that we do. So if you have a second, you can whip out your cell phone, scan that QR code that you see on your screen there, and then you can decide if you'd like to become a member. Head over to villagepreservation.org, learn a little bit more about the advocacy work that we do, but I also highly recommend that you check out many of the great digital resources that we have available on our website as well. We have an incredible image archive with hundreds and hundreds of images donated by Village Preservation supporters of pictures of our neighborhoods throughout the decades. And we also have a wonderful selection of digital maps as well. Put yourself a walking tour together and learn more about the incredible people and buildings in our neighborhood. And actually tonight we will be talking about one of our other wonderful digital resources available as well. Now, I also highly recommend that you head over to villagepreservation.org/events. Take a look at some of the other great events coming up. On the 5th of November, a webinar to help celebrate the bicentennial of the Erie Canal. And on the 13th of November, we have a meet and greet in person with Assembly Member Harvey Epstein. So if you're interested in attending either one of those programs or any of the other great programs coming up in November, please head over to villagepreservation.org/events. But now I'm going to hand it over to Village Preservation's Executive Director, Andrew Berman. He's been Executive Director since 2002. He's a lifelong New Yorker, and he has worked in government and politics and is a trained architectural historian. And I'm going to leave it to him to introduce our wonderful guest for this evening. I shall vanish into the shadows, but if anybody needs me, I am here. You're muted, Andrew. Just...
Thank you so much for the introduction, William. And welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here tonight for Sounds of the Village, a conversation with Richard Barone. For those of you who don't know him, Richard, who's somebody I've known for a long time and admired, is an acclaimed musician, recording artist, performer, producer, author, and professor whose lifetime of work has been profoundly influenced by and intertwined with the musical history of Greenwich Village. His memoir, Frontman, Surviving the Rockstar Myth, was published in 2007 by Hal Leonard Books, and his second book, Music and Revolution, Greenwich Village in the 1960s, was published by Rowman and Littlefield in 2022 and launched at the Museum of the City of New York. It's incredible, and we'll talk more about it as we go along. It's a celebration of the early 1960s music scene in Greenwich Village, where Barone lives to this day. He's taught and lectured at the Clyde Davis Institute of Recorded Music at NYU and currently teaches Music and Revolution, Greenwich Village in the 1960s at the New School of Jazz and Contemporary Music. And let me just say that part of what inspired us to have this particular conversation this evening, beyond just how incredible Richard is and his career, and how it sort of really speaks to the cultural ferment of Greenwich Village, he recently generously sat down with us to provide an oral history, which I would strongly recommend you checking out. It goes into way greater depth and detail than we're going to be able to get into tonight in our mere 50-ish minute conversation. William's going to drop in the chat the link to both Richard's oral history as well as our general oral history collection, which has, sort of some of the greats over the years of Greenwich Village, Jane Jacobs, Marlise Momber, just a whole range of artists, activists, small business owners, etc., in their own words, talking about the way that they witnessed or changed history. And if at the end of the evening, as I'm sure you will, you want even more Richard Barone, go to richardbarone.com, which William will also drop the link to in the chat. And that will allow you to find out even more about Richard's work, his life, his music, his books, his performances, etc. So we're somehow in the course of about a 50-minute conversation going to cover many, many decades, at least in part. Richard, I'm looking forward to diving in here. I was fascinated by reading your oral history. I've known you for many years, but the details of what was in there were just so, so fascinating. And I want to start a little bit just by contextualizing you. You come from Florida. But you had a very unusual kind of early life there in terms of your exposure at a young age to the music industry and to what would become one of the great influences of your life. So can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like growing up in Florida and how it set the stage for the rest of your life and career?
Well, yes, and thank you so much for having me on this program today because I very much respect and love the work of village preservation, and just as a longtime resident of Greenwich Village, I appreciate the work that you do. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now, my my history, especially my musical history, starts at a young age because I was about 7 years old growing up in Florida, obsessed with listening to the radio and wanting to meet the radio personalities. My mother took me to meet one of my favorite DJs, a radio station, WALT AM, top 40 radio station in Tampa. And somehow I got myself on the air on a regular program called Beach Party. I was the little DJ. I was 7.
You were
It's
7. My
It
God.
was 7, and that opened up. Well, I think what it really did more than anything else, two things. It made me like very interested in the idea of communication and that I could speak to many people at the same time. I was aware that there were listeners like we have now, and I thought about a bigger picture as far as how I presented myself and how I listened to music and how I played and listened, like perform music, even though I wasn't yet performing. I was playing records. That also,
And
go ahead, go
Richard,
ahead.
can I just, so
Of
this
course.
was like the like late 1960s, so like an
Yeah.
incredible time for music when music was changing and expanding, and you're a 7-year-old with a show on the radio in the middle of all of
Yes, I was. And one thing I was very interested in, I learned that many of the acts that I was playing records by were from Greenwich Village, like the Love and Spoonful. Now,
it.
some of their records are later 60s, whatever, and they were, they're later records, but I got into the whole catalog and I was able to play anything I wanted, basically. Uh, and I was very intrigued by Janice Ian because she was a teenager. And I thought, wow, when I'm a teenager, I can make records too. It's very inspiring. Like the Greenwich Village music scene, even at that age, was very inspiring to me. Of course, then, I was no longer the little DJ. Went to, by the time I was in high school, et cetera, I was not really involved with the radio, but I had this background which made it easy for me to meet musicians as they came through town. I think that's one way to put it. I wasn't shy about going to concerts, meeting musicians afterwards when I was in junior high and high school. And that led me to meet some really interesting people.
Right.
Uh, and one
One
of which, yeah,
one in
go ahead.
particular who really changed your life.
Yes, because, and he was Tiny Tim. Now, I don't know how many listeners out there remember or know of Tiny Tim, but he had been a celebrity in the 60s. By the time I met him, and it's now the 70s, it was another era. And he was very approachable because he was performing for a week or so at a roadside motel in Tampa, Florida. So I went with some friends to see his show. We weren't allowed in because we were too young. We were not of age to go into a nightclub. But he did meet us afterwards and asked if he could perform the entire show for us in his motel room,
Wow.
which he
That's
did.
incredible. Oh my gosh.
But
That
he
and what was
did.
that like? How did that
It
feel?
was fantastic because really he was a great storyteller.
Mhm.
And many of his stories, again, dealt with Greenwich Village in the 1960s because that's when where he was coming up. He was playing at various uh, uh, bars and things before he was discovered by NBC for Laugh-In, which was a television show that he made his national debut on, I guess. But before that, he was performing quite happily in Greenwich Village. And there were venues that he told me about that I will never forget the names. The Page Three, I think, was one of them.
Mhm.
And there were other venues, the Fat Black Pussycat, and
Mhm.
all these like mystical venues that he would talk about were just the stories were just incredible.
Right.
And
So it sounds like even from that relatively young age, you were sort of imbued with the mythology of Greenwich Village and of, sort of the magic that it captured.
yes, and I believe it is magic. And when the Love and Spoonful sang, "Do you believe in magic?" They really meant that that was a specific magic they were talking about that was in Greenwich Village for them it was particularly the Night Owl Cafe on West Third Street, in which they felt it was magic that their music could make people dance.
Mhm.
I don't know if you knew that. That's what that song is about.
Yes,
And
yes.
yes,
We've
and
we've actually done some nice research and writing about the origin of some of that, and I know the night owl was really important to them.
yeah, and I think I might have during the writing of my book, I probably was hit up your site to look at that and to reinforce. I always try to check everything in many different ways to see if it was a true story. And I didn't even always wasn't sure when I would ask the artists themselves because they often have their own spin on things that make things that the stories become different. But that's a true story, and I do believe in magic. And I did believe in magic then. So I made it my point, especially when Tiny Tim, I was going to say Mr. Tim because he did always call me Mr. Barone, even at age 15 or 16. Uh, he did tell me, Mr. Barone, you should be in Greenwich Village. Just simply as
Well,
that.
well, that leads me to my next question. So
Yeah.
how did we translate this sort of, adulation or love of Greenwich Village and its magic to your actually being here and being a part of it?
Well, there was two ways, really. I had an uncle, my father's brother lived on 8th Avenue in Chelsea near 23rd Street. He was on 21st Street. So I got to visit one summer
Mhm.
between maybe, I don't know, 10th and 11th or 11th to 12th grade. And I got to experience a lot of New York, not as much as I would soon when I moved here, but I did get to visit Max's Kansas City, for instance, which was right off of Union Square. I was not, again, I was not really legal age, I don't think even yet, but I found my way into it
Yeah.
and loved it.
I'm sure
And
you're not the only underage person who ever made it into Max's.
exactly. That became a venue that when I started later with the Bongos, that was one of our favorite, venues to play at because of its history with the Velvet Underground and Andy Warhol. On that first visit, when I visited my uncle and aunt on 8th Avenue, I did go to the factory and I did meet Andy. And he did give me a copy of his book, The Philosophy of Andy Warhol from A to B and Back Again, which he not only signed for me, but drew a Campbell's soup can on the title page, full
Oh, wow.
size.
So,
And
and this was approximately when and which location of the
so
factory?
that was 75, and the
Okay.
location of the factory was Union Square.
Wow. So this was already after the assassination attempt when in
Yes.
general he got much more sort of removed from the public, but somehow you managed to make it in.
I don't know how, but it was bullet. There was a lot of bulletproof. Apparently, I'm not sure if it was really was bulletproof, but there was a lot of plexiglass
Mhm.
everywhere. There was security cameras, which at that time was not really common.
Mhm.
So that was intimidating. But I still knocked on the door and I got let in and got
Oh,
to meet people there. They were very nice, and I asked if I could say hello to Andy, and they said yes. He was painting hammers and sickles, gigantic silk
oh,
screens of hammers and sickles. And I got to see him do it. And then I asked to purchase a copy of his book, but he gave me one. It was Philosophy of Andy Warhol. And of course, a copy of Interview Magazine he gave me because that was his thing. He would hand out copies around town.
yeah.
He was
I
very
remember.
congenial and did come to some bongo shows later at the Ritz when we played there.
Oh, that's excellent. So this is when you're still on a visit.
I was just
Um,
on a visit, yeah.
so when do we get you here permanently,
Ah,
and how does
so
that happen?
well, I was going to college. It was my first year of college. I was attending University of South Florida, but getting bored there, I just felt I wasn't really making any progress the way I wanted to. I was studying cinematography, filmmaking, and I was interested in doing music for films.
Mhm.
But during that time, the Monkees of all people were coming through town. Davy Jones and Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees, and it was just the two of them performing as the Monkey Show.
Mhm.
But their backing band I was aware of because I had just purchased a two record vinyl set on Atlantic Records called Live at CBGB. And
Mhm.
it was a live album of all the bands, or not, of many of the bands that were playing it at that club. And I was very interested in the punk scene, mainly through Patti Smith. I really loved Patti Smith and her group Television that were coming out of that scene. So now, as you can see, it's later 70s. And I wanted to come to New York. And I told the Laughing Dogs, I met them. I went to the show with a friend, and we met the group and said, we know you're the Laughing Dogs. I have your album that you just did, the collection of songs from CBGBs, etc. They were very nice and were surprised that anybody in Tampa knew who they were. Invited us
Oh,
to go on tour with them for a bit. They were going to Miami next after Tampa. And it was in Miami that we just blurted out. My friend Gene and I just said, we really want to come to New York sometime. And they said, well, why don't you just stay in our loft in Brooklyn? Because we're going to be on the road the whole year with the Monkees.
mhm.
Well,
That's such a
got
classic, right place, right time, right question situation.
so we moved to Gene and I pretty much got rid of all of our belongings we could get rid of, including cars, and got some cash together and came to New York and stayed for about 6 months on J Street in Brooklyn.
Oh, so
And
right in downtown.
yeah, J Street, right across from Borough Hall, right at
Huh?
Borough Hall. J Street Borough
Okay,
Hall was this subway stop, and
sure.
Jean was great. She was such a go-getter. She got a job on CBS television on a soap opera called As the World Turns, and she got me a little job on that. I was acting on that show for a minute, and it was during that time that I answered an ad in the Village Voice of musicians looking to start a band, and it turned out it was going to be the Bongos.
Uh-huh.
They weren't really quite formed yet,
Hmm.
but
So, so
that
the
was
bond,
all very quick. That was all very quick. It happened very quickly, and suddenly I was in a band rehearsing.
right.
Mm.
And so the bongos came about because you were actually responding to an ad. So these were
Yeah,
people who you didn't previously know,
no.
but you felt that you gelled, you clicked.
The
Um,
ad said something, looking for a guitarist into Velvet Underground, television, Talking Heads, Brian Eno, who I admired so much.
sure.
And I answered the ad, and the next thing you know, they're in our loft. They had a soundproof loft where you could play music, and I was jamming with them, and it
Mhm.
did gel immediately.
Mhm.
There was another singer in the group at the time, Glenn Morrow, who then started a band called The Individuals.
Mhm.
This is these were musicians who lived in New Jersey, in
Yeah.
Hoboken,
Well,
and
so I don't want to jump ahead too much, but
no,
because I don't want to miss this thread. So I'm intrigued by this, the Hoboken scene, how it
yeah,
related to Greenwich Village, which you
yeah,
were also had one foot in, and just
yeah,
interested
yeah, of
how
course.
many how many of the Hoboken bands seem to be very much influenced by the Velvet Underground. That seemed to be one of the sort of common threads through that scene, and I'm just curious, like what was that about? What did you feel? Why did you think that was the case?
Well, first, let me say there were no other bands in Hoboken that we knew of when we started there.
Mhm.
Uh, there was, I think we learned of one other band. Really, it was down to that. There were no real live music venues in Hoboken. I think I'm safe in saying. Um, so I the Velvet Underground, I think it's not just Hoboken. The Velvet Underground were the first. They were the first in many things. By the way, I'm teaching a course about the Velvet Underground at the new school starting next spring. A Velvet Underground ensemble. We'll be exploring their music and history as well. But I will say, and I believe this, I think they created the genre in a way of alternative rock because they
Mhm.
were alternative and they were rock.
Sure.
And their subject matter, I mean, talking about trans people and talking about, you know, boldly and I think unabashedly talking about drugs, et cetera, which was it was in the air, but no one talked about. The Velvets were opening the doors to conversation on so many subjects that were taboo.
Sure.
But that's not the reason they were great. They had these elements of early rock and roll, mixed from Lou Reed especially, but and doo-wop, which he loved, but mixed in with the avant-garde classical
Mhm.
world that John Cale was coming from
Right.
with his
Right.
viola. I mean, so they were really ahead of their time. So
Sure.
it's no wonder that at that point, after okay, post-punk, because punk music was like a stripping away of so much artifice and the banality and phoniness, etc., which you know I still like as it's classic rock, but there's a lot of theatrics and stuff. The punk rock was like wiping that out, and now a new inspiration is this idea of experimentation and creating your own world at like the Velvet Underground did, and talking about things in a more blunt way and sometimes a spoken way. Lou Reed's voice was not a classic singer. He was not a typical rock or any kind of popular music singer. He was his own style that was almost spoken. It almost comes out of the beat poets.
Right. And one of the distinctive things about the Velvets, which I think, sort of carries over into a lot of your work and a lot of the other bands from that time, is it's both looking forward and kind of, avant-garde, as you said, but it's also looking back as
I
well. And
know.
it's sometimes it's even very conservative in some ways, which is kind of
Yeah,
against the image of it, but sort of drawing from these kind of much more traditional, sort of simple vernacular kind of musical forms. And I guess it sounds like that sort of really inspired you or was in sync with your own aesthetic.
it did. And may I say something about the Greenwich Village scene behind this whole, like as a backdrop for all of this, including the Velvet Underground? They were East Village. A lot of the bands, like the Love and Spoonful, were West Village. So there was a bit of a rivalry. I feel it, but I also heard it from the horse's mouth because I was performing in Central Park doing a Music and Revolution concert, and we did a Velvet Underground song in the show. I think it might have been "I'll Be Your Mirror," which I love, and John Sebastian. I hope if you're listening, John, I'm sorry. I'm going to say what you told me. He kind of whispered in my ear. We didn't really like them much, because there was a rivalry. The East Village bands were edgier, was especially the Velvets,
Mhm.
and not quite as mellow in certain ways for various reasons. And I think that there was an interesting rivalry that was important to the growth of the scene and the creativity that was going to happen in Greenwich
Mhm.
Village. You
Mhm.
know,
Sure. So would you describe the sort of the village scene as kind of maybe a little more folksy, a little more idealistic, and the East Village a little sort of maybe edgier, a little more dystopian, sort of or something of that nature?
from the point of view of what Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground were doing, yes. Um, There was a lot of crossover and a lot of similarities. Like if you listen to a song, like if you don't mind me making a comparison, if
Of
you
course.
and they had the same producer, by the way. If you listen to Simon and Garfunkel's song Bleecker Street, which I
Mhm.
love, and you listen to Sunday Morning by the Velvet Underground, they're very similar. You could almost do a medley of the two.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's a lot of musical crossover, even with their experimentation. The Velvets could really pull it back, and if you hear their demos, they're quite
Sure.
folky. Lou would never have admitted it, and he became a friend and mentor to me, even though we wouldn't say like an official mentor. He may have been unintentionally a mentor to me because we did programs together and events together, I learned something every time.
For
Uh,
sure. And
but
their music could be some of the sweetest music you've ever heard.
I know that's
And,
what's
and
so
and at other
magical.
times it could be some of the most, sort of the noisiest, harshest, most, kind of disruptive sounds you've ever heard as well.
Disturbing, yeah, it can be very, very disturbing. But I
Yeah.
always tell my students when we get up to the point of their catalog, when we do the White Light, White Heat album, which is 1968, that came out early in that year, maybe January, and it
Right.
seems to presage that year. The turmoil of 1968 seems to be captured on that album. The
Right.
noise, the disruption, as you said, the chaos of that year is already on that album.
Right. The summer of love is over and, sort of the war has begun. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
well, so tell me about, we've obviously hit on it a little bit, but how did Hoboken fit into all of this? How did you end up in Hoboken?
Yeah.
And how did that scene nurture you and how did it relate back to the village?
Yeah, well, let me tell you. Uh, as I mentioned, the Laughing Dogs built a really beautiful loft on J Street. And it was when people saw it, they loved it. And so one of the musicians that visited one day um, had the money to buy it from them and said, I wanted to buy the loft, make it their studio, etc. Which they were at that point, because they were like on the road all the time, they decided to sell it, which meant that I no longer could live there because they were selling their loft. It was at that point that I told you there was Glenn Morrow, who was he was the person who actually put that ad in the Village Voice that found me, was part of the Bongo group at that time. It was not called the Bongos, it was called the letter A, which we came up with. It was very similar to Andy Warhol's first novel, which was just the lowercase letter A. Glenn said, "Why don't you come live with me in Hoboken? I have a 3-bedroom apartment," which he did. And believe it or not, the rent there was only $88 a month. So I did decide to move there with Glenn Morrow. And then one of the future Bongos, Rob, bass player, moved in. So it was the three of us. So we only had to pay a very small amount of rent. As you can see, it was less than $90 a month. So that means less than $30 a month. Outrageous, really. And for a
Wow,
beautiful 3-bedroom apartment with a view of Manhattan.
that's amazing.
Hoboken was, I mean, still, well, maybe not so much then, but had been, I think, in the 60s, an artist community. I know Jackson Pollock had a studio there. The play Hair, which was about Greenwich Village, as you know. I mean, almost all of Hair is specifically about Greenwich Village and its residents at the time. The auditions, I believe, were held in Hoboken for
Oh,
that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There was a lot of hippies, and it was Hoboken was an artist's place because it was affordable,
Mhm.
etc. I saw it as a parallel to Greenwich Village, and it's lined up. The streets are, I don't know if you know that, like 14th Street is lined up
Well,
with 14th Street in Hoboken, 14th Street
right.
here in
You're
Manhattan.
looking straight across the river, right at each other.
It's directly across, so it's really right across. There was a lot of similarities. It was like a little village. It just wasn't Greenwich Village because there were no music venues there, so we had to start one.
Right. But then there was one.
There was one because luckily, again, the timing. There was an old tavern called Maxwell's Tavern. It was named Maxwell's only because there was a Maxwell House coffee factory down the street. Huge, by the way, a huge coffee factory, which we lived across the street from. And it was a bar, a drinking person's bar for after work, basically. Well, that was for sale, and a family, the Fallon family, Steve Fallon and his family, purchased it. Glenn Morrow, being an entrepreneur, dragged me over there and said, let's go over and see if we can play there. Because now there's new owners. Maybe it could be a place where we could play music. We went and met Steve Fallon, and he said, yes. He said, yeah, you can play here. So once this new setup was made, it became a very nice restaurant. They opened the windows. It was a bright space, and it looked like something that might have been in Soho at the time, with plants in the window, and it looked kind of like a health food restaurant in Soho.
Right. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we were able to perform right in the middle of the restaurant. He just cleared a few tables, and we just set up right there. Well, let me tell you that the entire town basically came out to see a group. Remember, it was A then. It was a group A to perform. They were at the windows, like people were looking in the windows because you could look in and see. And listen, it was overcrowded. The fire department closed it down for overcrowding. There was a buzz from the very first note we played there.
Wow. And can I ask you, so prior to your playing there, who was performing at Maxwell's, or was it
Nobody, nobody.
was
We were the
just a
first band.
restaurant, really?
It was just
Oh,
it had just opened. It was a newly opened restaurant with a
okay.
very healthy menu.
Mhm.
The Bongos drummer was the chef. It's all
Oh,
very connected. Yeah. So we lived only half a block away. So that became not even our home away from home. That was our home. It was connected to our home, basically. We ate there. Our drummer worked there. We helped them get other bands to play there eventually, help them design their flyers.
mhm.
And it was the beginning of a music community. It was very exciting. And of course, I had known about the Greenwich Village music community and was happy and thrilled to be part of what could be maybe a new Greenwich Village type music community in Hoboken.
Well, and certainly one that had connections. I mean, it's just a quick path ride from the West Village. So
Yeah.
obviously there was a lot of cross-pollination there.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what happened in your career from there. So the Bongos had quite a bit of success
Yeah.
from Maxwell's to MTV. So
Yes. Yeah.
what's happening with you from there musically and professionally?
A lot happened. So A existed for several months, but then the three other ones, Glenn Morrow went off and did his own music, and the other three became the Bongos. That's when we talked the Fallon family into letting us use not just the front room, because, having loud music in a restaurant meant broken glasses and things would break and fall off. It was not appropriate for rock and roll. So we asked if we could rehearse in the back room, which was a storeroom. That became what people know of as Maxwell's, was the
Sure.
back
Yeah.
room.
Mhm.
And that was the storage space that they cleared away, put things in the basement so that we could have a stage. And we were, again, the first band to play in the back room at Maxwell's.
Oh.
But now it's the Bongos. Now it's no longer A. And this is when that's when things really started taking off.
Mhm.
Uh, the place would be packed all the time. And a record label executive, and I say that loosely because he was just 21 years old and had just started a record label because he had won money in a horse race in England
Uh,
and started a label called Fetish Records in London.
mhm.
Happened to be here kind of scouting around to see what bands he could see. He came to see the Bongos and offered us a contract right after our set. We'd
Wow.
only been together maybe 3 or 4 months at that point, I believe.
That's incredible. So how long after that did you put out your first album?
So very soon. So what we started doing for Fetish Records was we were very adamant in only putting out singles at first, which we did. We did a series of singles in England. They did well. They got around the U.S. and U.K.
Mhm.
and that led to a New Jersey label called Gem Records, which I still work with occasionally. I do tracks for their collections of songs all the time. Um, Wanted to license all of our British singles to make an album. Marty Scott, the owner of the label, who's still my friend, said, in the US, you need to do a vinyl album, like it has to be an album.
Mhm.
So we allowed it to all of our singles to form an album called Drums Along the Hudson.
Mhm.
And that was our first album release. That came out that was just maybe a year after that came out in early 82. All of 81, we were performing, we were doing singles.
Right.
And in 82, we put out Drums Along the Hudson early in the year and started touring. Again, a lucky break was that the B-52s were going on tour for their first big tour and liked us and said, would we be their special guest on tour?
Had they seen you perform at Maxwell's, or how did that connection happen?
I honestly don't remember or know. I don't think I ever even knew how that actually happened, but we were on tour doing our own shows
Mhm.
when we had an agent at that point because had to organize our schedules, called us up on the road and said, "No, do you want to go on the tour with the B-52s? You can meet them in Chicago, whatever it was, wherever we were, that night. We could switch over and go on their tour," which we did. We did our own show that night and we went on the road with them.
Oh, that's great. So maybe they had even seen one of your touring shows.
It could be. But
Well,
we
that's
became good friends. And I never really asked them how they found out about us, but we did get the offer, toured with them, and that got us seen by RCA Records, who then wanted to sign us in the US.
yeah. And so ultimately, how many
It's pretty
albums?
magic. Do you believe in magic? Yes.
It sounds
Yes.
like it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, how many records did the Bongos put out?
So we really wanted to do singles and EP. We liked dance 12-inch singles that the DJs would play. And we we made Drums Along the Hudson, which is an album which is all sort of composed of singles.
Mhm,
Then we did for RCA Records an EP, extended EP called Numbers with Wings. That did very well for us.
mhm.
And you were mentioning MTV. Well, we had already been making videos along the way, but by the time we did Numbers with Wings, MTV had started and started playing us a lot. And the video for Numbers with Wings got us nominated at the very first Video Music Awards, the VMAs. We were nominated for Best Direction. And to be
Mhm.
honest, it really was well directed by Giuliano Waldman, who had been a cinematographer for Fellini.
Mhm.
Because
Oh,
I asked for Fellini.
pedigree.
I said, can we get Fellini to make a video? And the RCA laughed. They said, he's not going to make a music video. Well, he did less than a year later for Culture Club. If they only would have asked him. But they did
Wow.
get one of his cinematographers, Giuliano Waldman, to film us and created the video for Numbers with Wings, which is
Mhm,
an very interesting piece. People can find it, of course, on YouTube.
mhm.
Um,
Oh,
that
definitely check it out.
that got us around. That did really well for us. It was
Mhm.
played a lot on MTV, and we got known through our videos around the country. We could play anywhere, so we toured. We started touring up to and maybe over 300 shows a year around the country.
Wow. And so let me ask you, because we're eventually going to, kind of bring this back into Greenwich Village.
Yeah,
When
that's where I ended up.
right. Well, when the
Yeah.
when the Bongos were touring and performing, were they doing much of that in the village?
Well, the Bongos did perform in the village because our one of our home venues became the Bottom Line, which was a classic New York venue.
Sure.
And also on 11th Street, which is right not far from where I am right now, the Ritz, which is
Mhm.
Webster Hall now,
Sure.
was these were like our main venues at the time.
Mhm.
So at the Ritz, that was a large dance hall,
Sure.
and we could pack that place. That's where Warhol came to see us with some of his entourage.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, we played in Greenwich Village, and I always had my eye on it. I moved to Greenwich Village in 1984. The
Okay.
reason
So
that was
in the middle of your time with the Bongos,
yes,
when you
yes.
moved from Hoboken back to the village.
Our
Yeah.
second album for RCA, so this is now our third album. When
Mhm.
we did Beat Hotel was the name of the album, we were recording at many studios, but ended up doing most of the work at Electric Lady Studios, which was, of course, famously Jimi Hendrix's studio on West 8th Street.
Sure.
And we were treated lavishly by RCA Records. I have to say, most artists complain about their labels. I could not complain about RCA. They were very good with us. We're still signed to RCA, and really, we did a holiday record 2 years ago for RCA, and they just put out this year, a new album, The Shroud of Touring, live in 1985, came out on RCA Records this year, 2025. So they've been supportive through most of my life. And they were very supportive back then as far as where do you want to record? And we said, well, we want to record everywhere. We want to do this. And they would book us for months and months at a time, maybe
Mhm.
3 months in a studio. And when we were making the Beat Hotel, we were at Hendrix's Electric Lady
Right.
studio for months.
Well, I want to drill down on that a little bit because you
Yeah.
you mentioned that in the oral history, and I know you've talked about that in other places. What was it like being in Electric Lady Studios, particularly at that point in your life and your career? And I understand you had a particularly special experience, maybe sleeping over there one night. What
Yeah.
that all like?
I slept over there more than one night, and I really felt it was haunted.
Mhm.
I heard sounds, and it got to be a joke because I at the time and I still am this way. I said I don't edit myself much, and I said in the press, yeah, I'd hear things, and like I remember in L.A. there was some article about the Bongos, and it said, yeah, he'd hear things like the guy's a nut, etc. But there were sounds. Now some people said, oh, that's just the reverb chambers like reverberating the sounds of the subway. Whatever it was, there were spooky, eerie sounds in that place at night. I was alone in it. I'm telling you, I think I I still say it's haunted. But Jimmy
Well,
never got a chance to record there even
right.
because he passed away before the actual recording elements were put in there. He did do jam sessions, including a famous one with Janice Ian, who I mentioned earlier. She must have been quite young then.
Yeah,
She
child.
she was jamming with Hendrix there. She talks about it
Well,
because he would invite his friends over. Yeah.
without a doubt, clearly there's a lot of energy in that place, and I'm
Yes.
it's sort of embodied, no doubt. I mean, just considering the unbelievable array of people who've done things there, and I'm
I
sure
know.
sort of poured their hearts and souls out, and got them sort of twisted into pieces as part of the kind of creative process that
Oh,
they undergo there. Was it the one recording you did there, or have you done more than one there?
I've done more. I did more there. I did more solo. I think some solo, a lot of mixing there. I love their mixing consoles.
Mhm.
And I visited when certain producers. I work with some great producers. Tony Visconti is one of my mentors and producers, and a good dear friend. He was producing an artist there, and he invited me to the session. And I got to hang out and just I'd be there. I've been there a lot, and for different events all through the years. It's a beautiful studio. It's one of the most beautiful recording studios, certainly in the world. The psychedelic murals are still there. The style and the way the feng shui of the studio, where you walk in and how it kind of curves around. It's a lovely place to work.
Mhm.
And yeah, I did mostly with the Bongos, but I think I was there mixing one of my solo records, and then again visiting people and going for events there all the time. Even
Well,
Record Store Day does events there. I mean, it's a great space. Yeah.
yeah. Well, you've sort of hit on an area that I definitely wanted to make sure we delved into, which is some of your favorite spaces in the village, music-wise.
Yeah.
We've obviously hit on a recording studio. I know there were all these legendary places that you'd heard about, but you've, of course, also experienced many of them, some still around, some sadly no longer with us. What are some of the ones that were your favorites or that really inspired you most?
Well, I got to play Folk City with the Bongos, and I went to see many shows there. That place was magical to me. That was Gertie's Folk City. That was like the
Sure.
first, like really legitimate folk venue in the village, because the rest of them, a lot of them were basements, and you'd pass the hat,
Right.
and it was loosely run organizations. And then Folk City was a little more legit. Like you had to pay money to get in, and they would pay the artist, um,
But that one that didn't close until what was it, 83 maybe?
something. I think even later than that.
Uh-huh. Because it
Maybe
was in
you
a
might be right. It might have been 83, but I was able to. The Bongos played there. See, our first shows. Let me tell you. So the Greenwich Village ties in with my life in so many ways. But one is the Bongos' first shows were not even the Bongos. It was the Bongos backing up a woman, Helen Hook. You may not know her, but she was in a group that was three women called the Deadly Nightshade. Have you ever heard of the Deadly Nightshade?
no.
They were a very interesting band, signed to RCA Records also, which we were later signed to RCA. Very progressive, woman-run rock band, right? Well, they were breaking up. They were going solo. Helen Hook was a violin player and guitarist, quite a musician. And she was looking for a backing band. Somehow she saw us play at Maxwell's and said, "Would you guys be my backing band?" So really, one of our first Manhattan shows was at Folk City backing Helen Hook. And
Ah.
she was she was not punk. We were coming out of a new wave punk place. She was country, a little bit, no, rock, classic rock with a hint of like fiddle, you know,
Mhm. Interesting.
quite good, very good. Still,
Uh,
she's lives in Hoboken now.
ah.
Um,
And
I
so
think, yeah.
that's how you got into
So that was our first magical venue to play at in Greenwich Village. We had played Max's Kansas City. I think we had just recently played there, but then we're in the Village. Now this was very special for me because, as you know, I've had this lifelong knowing that I should be in Greenwich Village, as Tiny Tim told me I should be. So that was really cool, and I knew the history of that venue, Folk City. So very special. When the Bongos started going our separate ways at the end of the 80s, I was living on Perry Street, I think
Mhm.
still at the time. And I wanted to start experiencing playing in Greenwich Village in the way that the folk singers did.
Mhm. Right.
And that's
And
when I started playing myself. Yeah,
that
huh?
was also when your kind of musical style shifted a bit. Now
It did.
you're on your own. You could do some new and different things.
That's right. And I didn't want, for personal reasons, I did not want to, because I didn't want to hurt feelings of the Bongos, because we became like brothers. We toured so much. In a 7 year or so period, we were together all the time. I didn't want to offend them by replacing them in any way, or to even seem like I was replacing their instruments. So I avoided having a bass or drummer and instead had a cellist who played bass lines on cello and a percussionist who played symphonic and African percussion.
Hmm.
And that became, and I had a guitar player playing acoustic guitar.
Hmm.
This became an album that I put out that was live at the bottom line
Hmm.
called Cool Blue Halo. And it
Hmm.
was my debut solo album, and it was completely live in front of an audience. It was scary because I knew that, again, I called Gem Records and Marty Scott, who I knew, and I told you he's popped up in my life repeatedly and continues to. I said, Marty, the band is sounding great. Why don't we record a live album? In those days, you had to hire a truck, and
Hmm.
you had a
Sure.
whole recording studio in that truck. It was major. It was a major expense. But he did it. He wanted to do it. So I was super nervous because I realized we've had one rehearsal with our percussionist, but I thought it sounds good. So it sounded good at the Speakeasy and whatever play and King Tut's Wawa had in East Village. So why won't it sound good on an album?
All right.
So
And can I ask you how would you describe the difference between recording an album in a studio and a live album?
well, they can be completely different.
Hmm.
In the studio, everything is isolated. There's no audience. You're in a room by yourself. You perform differently. Just on that. Okay, first thing. Secondly, sound wise, the studio is meant to be a controlled environment. So there's a separation of instruments that you could never do live, really, I don't think, and have it be really truly live. Third, if it is third, I think third is that you the let's see. So with the separation, you can't overdub. Like in the studio, often, mostly, you would want to do your singing once you do the music. You
Hmm.
lay down the music and you've got it the way you like, and then you would do a vocal. Basically, that's how most people would record. Not always, but often. In the live situation, a live album, everything is happening at once. There's especially in those days, very little chance of fixing any mistakes.
Hmm. Sure.
So you have to roll with it. You have to know if something goes too fast or too slow, or if something is out of tune, which goes out of tune. You're basically stuck with it. So it's a gamble in those ways. You don't know what's going to happen. Again, magic happened.
Right.
It really came out beautifully. We didn't. It was a no, like I was gonna say a no-brainer, but it just happened, and then it didn't require any fixing.
Sure. Right. There's a certain kind of magic that can only be captured, I think, live, but
Yeah,
it's rare. It's lightning in a bottle.
but that audience response after the first song
Sure.
just fueled us. Like they were so loving,
Hmm.
and our sound was unique at that time. This is at the beginning of what was going to be the grunge movement,
Hmm.
and we were doing just the opposite. We
Right.
had classical.
Wonderful.
It was chamber music, and we
Yeah.
had the cello, and it was still sort of rock and roll, but it was done with a delicacy and a care in the musicianship. That my group was amazing. Valerie Naranjo, it's still the percussionist on SNL,
Hmm.
as she plays the timpani and vibraphone and all these different instruments on the record. And Jane Scarpintoni became a very popular musician on the scene for Lou Reed and others. And Nick Celeste singing harmonies with me. They gave so much care to the presentation
Right.
that the
And
audience felt that. Yeah.
how important was the bottom line to your, kind of musical career? Was it a big place, or were there other places that you would also kind of cite?
Maxwell's was the first. The
Hmm.
bottom line became my second home.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just to do this type of show, like to do my concerts. It was also to develop ideas for shows.
Hmm.
Like we did like a talk show format. I did a series for Ellen Pepper at the bottom line called Writers in the Round. in which we had two guests. Myself and Jules Shear were hosts, and we had two guests, and we would learn their songs. We rehearsed here in my apartment here, and learn their songs, and then present it as a show, talk show format with music at the bottom line. That was really an educational experience for me to learn how to present shows. And then I did each holiday season, we did Handel's Messiah as the downtown Messiah. And that was a very unique piece of work. We did 7 shows. We sold out everything with all various artists, many from Greenwich Village, but all the musical styles that would have been that would represent what was being played in Greenwich Village. That's how we did each aria in the Messiah. So there was blues, folk, rock, pop, jazz, quite a lot of jazz, and it was a very beautiful show. It was on National Public Radio each year for 7 years, live from the bottom line.
And the bottom line was somewhat of a unique space in the Village. I mean, to me, it always seemed like it was the sort of the zenith of the kind of like performance spaces in the neighborhood. It was the most substantial. It was, it kind of had the most heft to it, at least at that point in time. I don't know if you feel the same.
Oh yeah, I feel that completely, because I had gone to see so many of my heroes perform there, like Lou Reed, who would perform there for a week. I know that I didn't go, but Bruce Springsteen, played there. I mean, this was the place to play in Greenwich Village, and maybe in New York as a whole. They had high production value. Alan Pepper and his partner Stanley kept it like the lights, the staging was professional. You felt like you were performing in a concert hall, even though it was a Greenwich Village nightclub. Right. And it did hold, you would do 2 shows an evening, and at a capacity of about 500 a show, you could reach 1,000 people there each night, So it was so exciting to play there. Yeah.
It wasn't as large, but I feel like it certainly reached the level of prominence that the Fillmore East had been ever so briefly. And just because of the nature of the neighborhood, there aren't that many spaces that can, sort of be like that in terms of playing that kind of role in the neighborhood. So that's great.
Very special place. And it started off with the band. LaBelle was the first act to play there in the 70s. And by the time we got there a decade later, that was it was the place to play. The Bongos played there somewhere on our journey up. That was one of our big steps, was playing the bottom line. And it was so exciting to see the line outside, and there'd be the line to get in, and then across the street was the line for the second show. It was so exciting to arrive at the club and see all these people waiting to see you. The whole presentation at that venue was special. And there's an upcoming book, people should know about it. A book written by Alan Pepper, and it's coming out in December of this year.
Mm-hmm. About the bottom line.
About the bottom line, and it's going to have great photography and the story. It's an oral history. It's an oral history type book also. Yeah.
William, make a note of that. We're definitely going to want to do a program about that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's written with Billy Altman, who's one of the great rock journalists also. So Alan picked a good co-writer for his book.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit, because of course, we could talk for hours and still only skim the surface of your life and career, but I want to make sure we talk about, for instance, some of the more recent work that you've done, collaborations, writing, staging these incredible concerts, much of which has been this kind of tribute to what seems to me as though it's kind of the accumulation of your lifetime of influences in terms of music that you love, that has sort of really touched you. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, and how it manifests in your work.
Well, you're right in that when you said what you love, because it's really what I love. And that's what I do. I do what I love. Like, I produce shows out of love. My first big concert, well, let me just back up just one second. I know we have a time limit, but let me just say, it was at the bottom line that I started producing and creating large events, because the Downtown Messiah was quite a big event. Mm-hmm. This gave me the confidence to start producing concerts. My first big concert outside of the bottom line was at Carnegie Hall, a tribute to Peggy Lee in 2003. I had, even as a child, I loved Peggy Lee's voice and music, and I wanted to do a tribute to her. So I met with George Wein of the Newport Folk and Jazz Festivals, got the funding through his company to produce a tribute to Peggy Lee. And that started me off on producing concerts like the one that I was able to produce, which benefited Village Preservation in 2023, which was the Music and Revolution at Carnegie Hall.
Can you say briefly, who was there and what that was? And by the way, cannot thank you again. It was both an incredible experience and, of course, an incredibly generous way of supporting village preservation. But what a lineup of people you managed to put together there.
Well, it was part of a series because when the book, even before the book came out, I had done Central Park. I did a Central Park event, which had Jose Feliciano and John Sebastian of the Love and Spoonful, and Melanie and Maria Moldauer. So many. It's almost too many to even mention. But Jesse Colin Young of the Youngbloods, all these Greenwich Village instigators that created this music scene. And let me just insert in here that one of the most important things they did was write their own songs. That was a trigger for the entire music industry that changed the whole world, music world, is that the artists, instead of just getting like professional songwriters to write their songs, it seemed like in Greenwich Village, they wrote their own songs. And that was such a big switch, literally a switch on, Anyway,
we take for granted now,
we
but
take for granted
radical change.
It was radical. And so anyway, so I started doing a series of shows with many of these songwriters and performers. And then at the Carnegie Hall show, we had Eric Anderson, who flew in from the Netherlands to be in the show. We had, of course, David Amram, a Greenwich Village stalwart who was so important on the scene. He played with many of them. He connected classical jazz and folk music all together.
Another oral history subject.
Oh, good. He's great for that. Company. Yeah. But it was just such an amazing array of singers. We had Carolyn Hester, who was the first artist to perform at Folk City when they opened as Folk City. She was on the bill with her daughters. It was really, you could still find the page on the Carnegie Hall website. If you go to Music and Revolution, you can find the roster and you'll be amazed at the people that were on that show. And it was so special for me because, for one thing, it was my book, Music and Revolution, coming to life.
Yeah. And Richard, what inspired you to write that book? I mean, you'd written before, but it was different. It was more of a sort of autobiography. What made you decide that this was going to be your new passion project?
Well, it was as simple as this. I was making an album called Sorrows and Promises, Greenwich Village in the 1960s, in which a great A&R guy and writer, Mitchell Cohen, suggested that I do these songs. He said, your voice is perfect to do Love and Spoonful and even the Velvet Underground and, Buddy Holly, who of course lived in the Village. All of these artists, like, you could do an album like this, a Janis Ian song. So I did it. And as I did each song, I researched the performer and the songwriter, and I realized what a story it was. I realized then more than ever what Tiny Tim was talking about, like why I should be in Greenwich Village. It became very clear when I actually did the music of that era, which I really hadn't done before like that, And when as I made the album, I said, wait a minute, this is a story. So I started performing concerts in which I would tell the story of each song and the artist and how they're connected or not connected or rivals or, Phil Oakes and Bob Dylan. And, it became a story that I could not write about. I had to write about it. And I wanted to write a definitive story written in the form of a story, written almost like a novel. I was obsessed with this idea of the Norman Mailer's nonfiction novel. Right. And that's how I approached writing it. Now, of course, I contacted you and you contributed the incredible timeline, because when I first started writing the book, I actually wrote all the things that are in our timeline that you've helped so much with. All of that was part of the text of the book, and my publisher and the editor were like, I'm not sure how you're in the 1400s here, 1600s, 1700s. I'm not sure if you might be a little off topic. And so
you might be zooming out a little too far.
A little too far. So what we did, we made a timeline for the readers. And please check out the book, because you helped, but many people helped me do it, but you really helped me with that timeline. The timeline sort of leads us up to why Greenwich Village exploded in the 1960s. This didn't just happen just for the hell of it. It happened because there was a long history that led up to the kind of creativity that is imbued in the walls and streets and sidewalks of Greenwich Village.
Right.
It just surrounds us here.
Richard, that leads me to something that you've spoken about that I really wanted to ask you about. And I also just want to say to everybody, put your questions in the chat because we're soon going to be moving into questions from the audience. So make sure you get them in there. I've seen some really nice ones in there already. Now, Richard, you've spoken about the importance of what are referred to as covers, and how that sort of process of people taking songs. I mean, you've talked a lot, we talked just now about this revolutionary thing of people writing their own songs, but you've also talked about something a little bit different, which is the process of people taking songs
Yes.
that a different songwriter wrote and kind of putting your own voice into it. And I feel like this relates a little bit to, sort of what you're saying here, how it's part of this kind of you build upon others, and it's a way of sort of growing the culture. Tell me a little bit about what that means to you and how you've seen that specifically in Greenwich Village.
Well, let me say that the idea of covering these songs, I think of it as interpretations. Tiny Tim would always tell me, I'm not imitating, I feel the spirits of these performers. That's what Tiny Tim used to always say to me as he did his songs from the 1920s and 30s. Well, I felt that way too. Like I let the stories behind the songs, the stories behind the songwriter, the turmoil that Phil Oakes was going through, or Janice Ian as a teenager feeling these things. I tried to let that come through when I did the songs, but I can't tell you how much that inspires my own songwriting. When I did my most recent single that came out is called All Fall Down, and it's a duet, and it's also co-written with Daryl DMC McDaniels of Run DMC. I had never collaborated with a rapper before, but I sent him the music, and he was so inspired by what I had started to write with the All Fall Down that it became a very politically charged message, inspired by the writers of Greenwich Village, especially Phil Oakes. And the idea of speaking your mind if you're feeling it, that comes out of covering. If that's your question, if you want to know how covering songs can affect the personality of a performer, I'll tell you that their spirits do come through, of that, the inspiration, the original inspiration of the song, if you really learn the song. And that's what I do with my students, by the way, at the New School. And that's why before the show, we were talking about how I've gotten rid of written tests and have just put in performances of the music that we're studying from Greenwich Village in the 1960s. And the students,
which is so Greenwich Village, by the way.
I know, I think so. And the thing is that as the students learn the songs and learn these stories, they're learning way more than I could ever get. And I understand that they learn it much more than if I gave them a normal written test with, yes or no answers or something like that. It's like, this is learning the music from within. And you're getting into someone's head and into their heart and their spirit when you do their songs, especially these types of songs that came out of Greenwich Village in the 60s, when it was a new thing to express yourself in this way, this very open way. Even if it's about personal relationships, but it's like this bluntness, like we talked about with the Velvet Underground, etc. It's an openness and it's a humanity that comes through that didn't really exist in popular music so much before that, because people were writing with a type of artifice in general that was just about how the rhymes work or how the hook was going to turn out.
Right.
And this is different. Yeah.
Right. Along those lines, Richard, I'm going to ask you, because I know you've talked about this a lot. In terms of the special role that Greenwich Village played in relation to music, it's often, sort of compared or lumped in with a lot of other places, whether it's Laurel Canyon, The Haight, Chelsea and London, sort of et cetera. But there's clearly a sort of a really special and distinctive element in terms of Greenwich Village, specifically just in terms of music. And I think you've really kind of spoken to why you feel it is so distinctive, and in many ways so much more important than any of those others. So I want to hear from you your thoughts on that.
Okay, I can tell you my thoughts on it. I will say that it was unique. None of those others compare. To me, Laurel Canyon, there's some great music that came out of Laurel Canyon. The singer-songwriter genre came out of Greenwich Village, really. By the time it made it to Laurel Canyon, the songs are way introverted, introspective. Let me put it that way. Introspective about the self. The Greenwich Village songs are about the we. Why? Because you're still in the middle of New York City. There's still the ambulance going by. There's still the homeless. There's still the just the street life of New York City is right there. The songs that came out of here are embody all of that. When Dylan did this, they have Phil Oakes. I mean, when he wrote "There But for Fortune," Phil Oakes, one of the great songs out of Greenwich Village. I mean, he's taking into account all the hardships that are around him because he's in the middle of an urban environment. You know, these other scenes that we're talking about are very sort of isolated bubbles to me. Even the hate, it's still like this hippie bubble. Laurel Canyon is a eucalyptus scented bubble also of really wealth and privilege. It's not the same thing. Greenwich Village, it all came together. The wealth and privilege mixing in with street life and taking the subway together and dealing with the harsh New York winters of the time. We don't have winters quite like they did back then. When Bob Dylan arrived, it was in the middle of a very harsh winter. You know, we dealt with them together. Greenwich Village had that extra something. It involved New York City, all the things we deal with in New York City, as well as this sort of like, rainbow over it that made it Greenwich Village. You still were dealing with looking uptown and seeing the Empire State Building, connecting it. I always say MacDougal Street was it's like a direct line to the Empire State Building, almost like, the way the sun comes through the Stonehenge. Like it's lined up like that. To me is symbolic in my own bizarre mind of like how it's still that connection to the media and commerce. Like it's Greenwich Village, like, okay, our songs can get out there. We're in New York City. We can get this music out there. There's all kinds of nuance to that. I'm just trying to give it to you in a nutshell. We talk about this a lot in my Greenwich Village class at the New School.
Well, and in your oral history as well.
Yes.
I mean, the Albert Hotel with the cockroaches on the wall.
I know.
I forget what it had been called, but what's now the Washington Square Hotel, which was also,
the Earl. It was the Earl.
Earl, of course. Yeah.
So, one woman, she was writing songs in the bathtub to get away from the roaches. I mean, now, of course, now it's a very nice hotel, but it was rough. And I mean, there was a rough edge there was a roughness to living here. It comes through in the music very strongly.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Richard, we've got some great questions, which I want to get to and ask you as well. And just a reminder to folks, drop your questions in the Q&A. So Dean is asking, he says, tell us how the amazing Woodstock reunion you put together in Central Park came about and how did you make it happen?
Okay. Well, I really didn't think of it as a Woodstock reunion, even though at the end of my course, we do end it with Woodstock because many of the Greenwich Village artists did perform there. But the Music and Revolution show that you're talking about from 2018 came together by me going to Central Park and asking to do it, and them saying yes, and then trying to get everybody here on the budget that we were given to do it in. It was very exciting to put that show together. That was the first big Music and Revolution concert that I did. The next one that was big was the Museum of the City of New York, and the final one of the larger scale was then, of course, Carnegie Hall. But
COVID came in the middle of all of that, right?
Yeah, COVID did come in the middle of all of that. That's why I was able to write the book, because I didn't have my usual performances. I was able to stay home and write, and also I'll continue with that answer in just one second. I was able to get people on the phone when I called for interviews. They were home when I got their phone number. And I was able to get 80 plus interviews for that book of artists that were there and musicians who were in Greenwich Village because they were home, Now, as far as that show, though,
even the darkest clouds have their silver linings.
Exactly. And it allowed me to really feel the spirits that I'm talking about when I walked the streets and there was hardly anyone around. I would go out at night. I'd be writing. I would take a break and walk down MacDougal Street. And I really could feel the vibe of what it might have been like. So that book is written from somebody who's actually thinking that they're re-experiencing the vibe of that era, you know. But that concert came together to the questioner, you know, it came together by just picking who I could gather together who was there. And once you have one or two, they all wanted to be there. You know, at first John Sebastian said, "Oh, that's my busiest time of the year. I can't be there." And then when he heard that Maria Muldaur was on the bill, who I think he's still sweet on, by the way, sorry to say, uh, you know, he was like, "I'll be there. I want to do it now." So okay, well, you know, okay. So it just grew and grew because they wanted to do it. That's the
Right. Well,
answer.
the gravitational force sort of expanded and
Yeah,
captured more people.
they wanted
Well,
to be there together. Yeah.
so here's a slightly different question from Francie. She said,
Uh-huh.
"Did you ever connect with the East Village loft slash jazz scene and or the Sixth Avenue lofts? What thoughts on that? Did that ever
Well,
intersect with
no, I
your
know about the loft scenes, you know, and the jazz and the experimental music that happened in lofts. It's not my focus on musical revolution, just from the title. It's the songwriting, the actual. I love jazz, and my students, most of my students are jazz students, by the way. I was teaching the department called the School of Jazz and Contemporary Music. But I didn't get into so much of the loft scene. I know Yoko Ono and others. She had an experimental loft that she would perform in, and you know, I really like experimental music, including jazz. You know, but that's not what I really focused on in these shows and in the concerts has been more of the songwriting movement that started in Greenwich Village that was singular and changed the music industry, like I was saying earlier, because it put the art in the hands of the artist instead of the record label saying, "Oh, here's a song to do." It's
Right.
now I've got my own songs, and that changed everything. So that's really where I'm coming from.
Sure. So John asks can Richard say something about Hal Wilner?
Oh, wow. Hal Wilner, one of the great record producers and a friend. I had admired his work since his great tribute to Nino Rota in the 80s.
Mhm.
I loved the music of Nino Rota. Again, I mentioned Fellini because Nino Rota is famous for his Fellini films, but also the Godfather theme, etc. But I loved his music, and Hal Wilner completely deconstructed and rebuilt it with different avant-garde and jazz and experimental artists doing that music. From then on, I was a fan of Hal Wilner's. I did not work with him, but I met him through Lou Reed. He produced some albums for Lou Reed, including Ecstasy, I believe, Ecstasy, and a lot of other music that Lou worked on in later years. So I would see Hal around and talk with him, but I wasn't asked to perform on his albums until his last album, which was a tribute to Mark Bolan and T-Rex, a group that was always close to my heart. I love T-Rex, and Mark Bolan I felt a special affinity to. So he asked me to come in and sing on that album as backup singer on many songs. Sang with Todd Rundgren, Kesha, Lucinda Williams. You know, it
Yeah.
was just a thrill to work with Hal, and we really hit it off in the studio to work together again. But COVID took him away. He died soon after we made that album. He did not see the release of that album and died of
Oh,
COVID. Yeah.
wow.
What a
Who,
great producer. Yeah.
yeah. Who were some of the other people that you would cite as some of your favorite collaborators, whether it was as musicians, producers, composers?
Um,
Just curious.
I've been very lucky with collaborators. Tony Visconti, one of the great producers. We wrote many songs together. I did an album called Glow in 2010. We wrote 9 of the songs together. I had been watching I loved his music from his David Bowie productions and T-Rex he produced, many other, even Badfinger, many groups that I liked as a young music listener. He is a great collaborator. One of my favorites was Jill Sobule, who recently passed away in a house fire, tragically, as she
Yeah.
was going to begin a tour. We wrote many songs together and had songs on television shows like Dawson's Creek, Teenage Show, and also The West Wing. These are shows in the 90s. We really hit it off as songwriters together and I think we wrote really well together. Of course, with the Bongos, that's a big collaboration. We have a show coming up on November 10th at Sony Hall.
Well, we have a question. I'm not sure if it's that show or not, but somebody asked if you want to say something about you and the Bongos upcoming show with Marshall Crenshaw.
Yes, we're doing a double bill with Marshall Crenshaw at Sony Hall. and
Oh, that's
that's around Times Square. I think it's 46th Street or so, and that's
good.
on November 10th. So yeah, that's a great that was very still collaborative working with them. You know, they're good pals of mine, and once in a while we get a chance to do shows together still.
I have to tell you, one of the my favorite concerts that I've ever seen was Marshall Crenshaw at Maxwell's.
Oh,
I know he's not from that scene, but
yeah, yeah, but he visited a
he
lot.
fit
Yeah,
in perfectly there. And seeing him at Maxwell's was amazing. And the
yeah,
Bongos and Marshall Crenshaw seems like a perfect pairing.
it is. We toured a lot together in the 80s, and that
Oh,
was a
that's
good package. Often it was the Bongos, Marshall Crenshaw, and David Johansen, sadly, who also passed recently,
yeah,
who
yeah.
did a fantastic performance, by the way, at the Carnegie Hall show we were talking about. It was a
That's
duet,
right.
if you recall, with David Amram on flute or whistle, one of his woodwinds. Yeah.
Yeah, I would never have thought that that was a performance that I would get to see David Johansen and Amram. That was incredible.
I thought
Uh,
that would work. I thought that would work. And that was David Johansen's last performance, I believe.
yeah.
Yeah.
Another question here. Singer-songwriter revolution needed to be curated and explored. It puts a whole new perspective on a power dynamic change between musicians, their audiences, and producers. Can you comment on that?
Sure. I mean, that's what I really feel it. When I talk about revolution in this book title and in the show title, it really is a musical revolution as well as a political attempt at a revolution. It's a musical revolution in that the artist took control more than they ever had before. And the major labels went along with it. It was kind of a miracle that they understood that once Bob Dylan had a hit and others started having some hits, that okay, I guess they know what they're doing because they no longer would assign you material or producers. You got to kind of pick. Of course, with Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel, the producer was often, by the way, genius Tom Wilson, who
Mhm.
also produced the Velvet Underground. Listen to that. I mean, why is there not more mention of Tom Wilson in our discussion of record producers when he produced the Velvet Underground, Simon and Garfunkel, Bob Dylan, Sun Ra, all at basically the same time and
Mhm.
more, and
Yeah.
sign Frank Zappa, to the label. He was at Columbia, also at Verve Records. But yeah, but he was an exception. He also let the artists do what they were signed to do, which is be themselves. I
Mhm.
think before that, there was a tendency for producers and labels to change an artist, make them more of this or more polished or more different, like a more of their vision of what an artist should be. Starting with the Greenwich Village scene, it became clear that the artists knew what they were doing and leaving them to their own devices could be very profitable.
Right.
So
And I think in some ways that really kind of speaks to the history of Greenwich Village in terms of it looking to artists and innovators to sort of lead the way as opposed to the more conventional path.
yeah,
Um,
it's like the same way the Greenwich Village residents didn't want to be on the grid when the grid was developed, and they said, "No, we're not going to go there." It's the same attitude with the Greenwich Village artists. They're like, "No, we know what we're doing. We're going to keep it this way."
we have our
That was
own
a
path.
lot. Yeah, like Buffy St. Marie and her songs, "It's My Way." I think it's the opening song on her first album. It's like, "It's my way." It's like, honey, I know what I'm doing. This is the way I'm going to do it.
Well, I think that's a perfect note for us to conclude on. Again, I really feel as though we've only just skimmed the surface, but hopefully whet everyone's appetite. Check out Richard's oral history on the Village Preservation website. Go to richardbarone.com and check out his books, his music, his upcoming performances, his radio show, everything there is to find out about Richard. And Richard, we're just so grateful to all for you for all of your contributions to the
Thank
neighborhood,
you.
your long support for village preservation, which we really, really appreciate. And this is, of course, just one of many things we've collaborated with Richard on, and I know there'll be many more of them.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And, is there a way to save all the questions? So I'm happy to answer some of these personally later, if we can save some of these somehow in the chat.
We'll make sure that we share any of those with you, Richard. Absolutely.
Great. Thank
Uh,
you.
thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. Great to see all of
Thank
you.
you.
And we will definitely be seeing more of you.
Thank you all for being so great and being such a great audience.
Absolutely. All right. Have a very good evening, everybody.
Bye-bye.